Okay, today we are going to look at 1-6. We're going to skip 1-5 just because it's a little bit longer and I'm not here to explain it. So we're going to talk about interval notation, which actually will lead us pretty well into the next lesson anyways. So the first blank here is going to be the word interval. So interval notation is just another way to write an interval. And if you're thinking, well, what is an interval? That is just the set of all numbers between two endpoints. So the inequalities that we have been solving, that's actually an interval, okay? So like, for example, when we were dealing with those and inequalities, and we said we had some specific region between 2 points, all of these points here, that's just an interval, okay? And so we would write it as, like let's say we're between 2 and 4. So that's an interval, right? Between 2 and 4. Those are all of your answers. So there's lots of different ways to write that. So the symbols, these are the square brackets. They're used to include endpoints within your interval. And then the symbols parentheses, those are used to exclude. So those are not included in the interval. So we have a lot of symbols going on here. We know that the closed circle, that means that point is a part of the set. And so now we're introducing that the closed circle is also the same thing as these brackets. So we can maybe write that off to the side here, closed. I'll leave that there. And then if you have that open circle, that's the same thing as using parentheses. So they all kind of mean the same thing. And it's just going to take us a little bit of time to get used to really writing this out and memorizing, okay, what symbol goes with what circle and what does that really mean on our graph and things like that. Okay, so these ones are already filled out for us and I'm going to walk us through step by step. So this is that and inequality, right? We know it's an and inequality because we have two symbols here. We're saying x is in between -4 and 3. It has to be part of both, right? It's not, well, x is greater than 4 or it's less than 3. It's both together at the same time, okay? In interval notation, this is what it's going to look like. You still use the same numbers. We have -4 and we have 3. In interval notation, I want to make a point to say that you always have two numbers, okay? It's kind of like that ordered pair, but it's not an ordered pair, but it kind of looks like an ordered pair, right? Especially when, we'll jump down to this one in a second when you're in parentheses, but you have to know the context of it, okay? So if this is an answer, we're going to have two numbers in that interval notation. And we use this bracket here because of this symbol, which we know represents a closed circle, right? So we need that square bracket to represent that -4 could be x. But this one here, we have that open circle symbol with this inequality. So therefore we need to use just the parentheses because 3 is not included. And so we know as a graph it looks like this: closed circle, shade everything in between, open circle. Okay, so the only new thing is that we're talking about how that's represented interval notation wise. So let's look at this. Well, what if you just have one part of an inequality, right? We don't have an and inequality where there's two numbers already listed. What's going to happen there? I'm going to jump to the graph first, and maybe that will help explain. So if we're graphing this on the number line, we're saying x is less than 1, closed circle, right at 1. We're shading everything to the left, okay? And because we're going forever to the left, we're actually approaching negative infinity, right? Infinity means we're going on forever, there's no end, and because we're moving to the left, it's negative infinity. So like I said, we always have to have two numbers as a part of our interval notation. So we need to show that. You always put the smaller number first and then the larger number to show the range. Maybe another way to kind of explain this is range as well. Sometimes people kind of remember that. So we put negative infinity first because that's technically smaller than 1, right? I know that's a weird concept, but this negative infinity is smaller than that 1, okay? And we have a square bracket around 1 because of the symbol here. We have that closed circle, so they all mean the same thing. But here's what's interesting is we have to put, this is something that is going to be always true, you always have to use parentheses with infinity. Okay, that is because infinity is something that can't be captured, right? You can't be exactly at infinity because infinity is something that is moving on forever. So we can't include infinity in our set. We have to technically exclude infinity, which I know is a very weird concept to kind of think about, but I just want us to remember that infinity is something that goes on forever. It's not attainable. It's not a tangible number, right? So we're always going to have to use parentheses whenever you're including infinity as a part of your interval notation. Okay, but hopefully that makes sense. Just because interval notation, we have to have those two numbers there, and because it's going forever to the left, we just have to say, well, it's going towards negative infinity. So the same is true if we had x is greater than -3. So we have that greater than symbol, so that means we have the open circle. Greater than means we shade to the right, and so because we're moving to the right here, we are approaching positive infinity because we're going to the right. So you put that smaller number first, which is -3. Then we're approaching positive infinity, so we put that second. Again, it's that open circle here, so you need parentheses, and then infinity also always gets that parentheses. So that is the breakdown of interval notation compared to the inequalities and the graphs that we have already been working with. Okay, so let's try some on our own. This is exactly how your homework is going to look. You're going to be given a big table like this where you're going to have different things filled out for you. You may have the inequality filled out, and then you have to fill out these two. You may have the interval notation. For some reason, I can't say that word. And then you have to go backwards and fill out the other two things. Sometimes you have the graph, and you actually have to come up with the numbers on your own, okay? So we just making sure that we can translate between all of the answers, okay? So looking at this first one here, we have -5 is less than x, which is less than or equal to 4. I like these because it's very clear what my two numbers are. We're saying x is in between -5, so we're going to put our open circle at -5 and closed circle at 4. And we're staying in between that so we can shade here in the middle. Now for interval notation, again, this is very clear. I have a very strict set of numbers. We're staying and we're going from -5 to 4. That's my range of numbers here. But now we need to figure out what kind of parentheses or brackets. This -5 has that open circle, therefore we need to use the parentheses. And this 4 has a closed circle, so therefore we need to use the square bracket. So there would be your answer. Okay, so this time we're starting at the interval notation, okay? So we have two square brackets, so we can already imagine that's going to be our closed circle on both. And again, we have a nice strict set of numbers that we're staying between 0 and 6. So we can graph this. We're going to say we're staying in between 0 and 6 with that closed circle. And so again, this is that and inequality, right? We have two clear endpoints. It's that and inequality, so we want it to look similar to this. So we're going to say my variable is staying between 0 and 6. And remember, with that and inequality, we're always using the less than symbols there. And because we have that closed circle, we need to include the or equal to part underneath. But this makes sense, right? We're saying x is greater than, technically here, this 0, but x is also less than that 6. So that's exactly what's going on in our picture. Okay, then we have one that just looks like this. We just have a graph, and we only have a graph going one way. We no longer have this kind of and inequality situation. So this one's a little bit trickier. We do have this kind of ending point of -2, but over here what's happening is my graph is approaching negative infinity because we're going to the left. So we can technically say my graph is going from negative infinity and stopping at -2. And so that's how we want to write our interval notation, is we're staying in between negative infinity and -2. Remember, infinity always needs that parentheses, and because this is an open circle, we are also going to use a parentheses there. Okay, but we should know how to write this inequality. This one's actually pretty easy, right? Since we only have one number, we only need to include that one number in my inequality. And the symbol that we're going to use is the less than symbol. Or you think, well, what symbol looks like the direction of my arrow? This one, right? They both point left. And it is just the less than because we have that open circle. So again, if you have something that looks like this, you're only going to have one inequality, kind of like what we did on the first day of 1-4. But if you have something that looks like this, where it's your and inequality, then you will have the two numbers there. Okay, so then we have x is greater than or equal to 4. This one is very easy to graph. We just put a closed circle at 4. Greater than means we shade to the right. Okay, so again, this one is we're starting at 4 and we're approaching infinity, positive infinity. So my interval notation is going to be from 4 to infinity. 4 has that closed circle because of my symbol over here, so therefore I also need to use that square bracket. Infinity always uses parentheses. Okay, last one here. So this symbol, union, I remember that I told you guys it would come back. So this is that union symbol, okay? So that is the or inequality. So if you need to look back at your notes on that, union means it's an or inequality. What we're saying is we're either going to have our range go from negative infinity to 0, or it's going to go from 5 to infinity. And so we want to keep that in mind, that this is the or, so therefore these are going to shade out. So we got to have that memorized, that the union is your or inequality. I remember, if you don't remember that, if you're like, I'm not going to remember, just remember that this means and, because this one looks like an A, okay? And so then that makes the other one have to be or. That's really how I remember it. All right, so we want to graph this. So our first little set here is from negative infinity to 0, and they both have parentheses. So we're going to have that open circle at 0, and then 2 negative infinity. So we want to draw that arrow out so it approaches negative infinity, which is over here. Okay, then we also have a closed circle at 5 because of that square bracket, and that one is approaching positive infinity, so we need to go the other direction. And so this is very clearly that or problem, right, because it's shading out. So now we just want to write that as an inequality. So we are going to say that x is going to be less than 0, right? X is going to be less than 0 because we're shading to the left, so that's your less than sign. Or, because it's that or problem, x is greater than or equal to 5 because we're shading to the right, closed circle. Okay, so that's about it. You guys have the rest of the time to work on your homework for this, which again looks just like what we did together, and the study guide. If you have any questions, please email me and I will be glad to help.